The war was still burning across Europe, but here, somewhere in the deep American South, the only thing that broke the stillness was the wind moving through pine trees and the distant hum of a generator behind barbed wire. The prisoners in Camp Shelby didn't know it yet, but this Christmas Eve would be remembered for something almost absurd: kindness. At dawn, frost clung to the fences like ghostly lace. The German women inside the camp woke slowly, each to the same cold truth. They were far from home, stripped of uniform insignias, and uncertain what tomorrow meant. Some had been clerks in the Luftwaffe, others had driven supply trucks, and a few had been Red Cross nurses until capture. Their hands still bore the calluses of discipline, but their faces had grown soft with defeat. Lieselotte Bauer was 19, from Hamburg. She had not heard from her mother in 7 months. Her last letter had come through the Red Cross, the paper thin and creased with worry. "We still have bread. Keep faith." Now, in captivity, she washed metal trays and learned the rhythm of American life: coffee at sunrise, cornbread at noon, and silence at night. But silence was easier than hope. Outside, 2 American guards walked the perimeter, their boots crunching on frost. One of them, Private Jack Morris, had grown up in Mississippi. To him, the war felt like a story someone had exaggerated. These pale, weary women didn't look like the enemies in the posters. They looked like tired farmhands, and when they spoke, their words fell soft, like the notes of a lullaby he couldn't understand. The camp itself was a strange middle ground, neither cruelty nor comfort. It followed the Geneva Convention to the letter: 3 meals a day, access to mail, medical care, and even small wages for labor. The prisoners earned camp scrip that could buy soap or cigarettes at the canteen. Yet dignity was harder to purchase. Lieselotte remembered arriving months earlier, stepping off the transport truck and smelling something sweet: the unmistakable scent of warm bread. She had not smelled it since before the bombings began in Hamburg. She had blinked, disoriented, half expecting an illusion. In her world, bread had become a currency of survival. Here it was routine. That night, she wept not for fear, but because the smell of bread made her feel human again, and it was unbearable. As December deepened, whispers of Christmas traveled through the barracks like contraband. Someone said the Americans celebrated with music. Someone else said there'd be oranges, those bright fruits none of them had seen since before the blockade. No one quite believed it. Germans had been taught that the Americans were decadent and cruel, the kind who would starve prisoners just to prove a point. Yet every morning, the mess hall offered coffee thick with sugar, something even German officers hadn't tasted since 1942. That morning, Lieselotte stood near the barack window, watching frost form on the inside of the glass. She could hear faint laughter from outside. The Americans decorating their own quarters, probably, stringing colored bulbs and hammering wood for what they called a tree stand. She had seen the men drag in a pine branch the day before, joking about it like children. She found herself smiling without permission. Her friend Hilda, 23, whispered, "Don't let them see you. They'll think you're grateful." There was no malice in her voice, only fear. Gratitude, in their minds, meant surrender. But that afternoon, even Hilda was curious. A rumor spread that the camp commander had called a meeting. The guards didn't bark orders this time. They simply opened the barack doors and gestured politely for the women to follow. It was unsettling, this sudden civility. They gathered in the mess hall, 24 German women, each wearing drab cotton dresses issued by the U.S. quartermaster. The air inside was warmer than usual. A record player stood in the corner, spinning something faintly familiar. Still knacked. Lieselotte's breath caught. The song was the same one her mother used to hum when blackout curtains muffled their tiny apartment. For a moment, she was back in that room, her little brother asleep beside the coal stove, the city trembling under distant sirens. Now the melody drifted across a room full of enemies, sung by an American chaplain with a southern accent so thick the words almost changed shape. Private Morris stood at the doorway, uneasy. "They said to keep watch, not sing along," his sergeant had told him. But as he watched the prisoners' faces soften, he found himself quietly mouthing the English version. "Silent night, holy night." The women didn't know why the Americans were being so kind. Some whispered that it was a trick, an attempt to make them confess things. Others thought it might be for propaganda, to show the Red Cross how merciful the camp was. Yet something about the scene defied logic. The chaplain's voice cracked halfway through the hymn, and instead of applause, the room filled with silence. Not distrustful silence, grateful, trembling silence. After the hymn, the camp commander entered. He was middle-aged, his hair thinning, his uniform pressed with military precision. He spoke through an interpreter. "Tomorrow is Christmas. In this country, we believe that even in war, we do not starve children or deny faith. The War Department has authorized a small observance for you. There will be food, music, and gifts sent from our townspeople, for your children back home." A ripple of confusion spread. Gifts? For their children? The words barely made sense. The commander continued. "This is not charity. It is Christmas." Lisa Lott's throat tightened. She hadn't dared think of her little brother Carl in months. When she last saw him, he'd been 5, clutching a wooden toy soldier. If the Americans were sending toys, who were they sending them for? Were they mocking her? That night, back in the barracks, the women argued quietly. Some said they would refuse to attend the feast. Others insisted they must, to show pride. But hunger and homesickness outweighed pride. By lights out, even the most defiant had tucked away a faint spark of curiosity. Outside, snow began to fall. A rare sight in the south, soft flakes catching on the barbed wire like pale moths. Private Morris looked up at the sky and muttered, "Even the weather's got better manners than we do." His partner laughed. "You'll see tomorrow," he said. "The colonel's gone soft. Says the Lord wants us to feed the enemy." Inside the barracks, Lisa Lott lay awake, staring at the rafters. Somewhere beyond the fence, the Americans sang another carol, their laughter echoing faintly through the cold. For the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid, just uncertain. She turned to Hilda. "Do you think it's real? The gifts?" Hilda hesitated, then whispered, "If it is, I don't know whether to eat or cry." The generator outside coughed once, then went quiet. In the stillness, Lisa Lott closed her eyes. The war was still raging thousands of miles away, but here, in this strange pocket of mercy, something fragile had begun to thaw. And as the wind pressed against the barracks and the snow thickened beyond the fence, one thought circled her mind like a prayer she didn't dare say aloud. If the enemy can show mercy, what else have we been wrong about? December 24, 1944, arrived like a secret whispered through frost. At dawn, the camp bugle sounded softer than usual, as though even the brass had decided to honor the holiday. Over the mess hall door someone, perhaps one of the guards, had pinned a crude paper star cut from an old ration box. The ink still showed traces of U.S. Army supplies, but from a distance it could have been gold. Lisa Lott awoke to the sound of footsteps and laughter beyond the fence. The Americans were busy hammering planks together, dragging crates, and shouting over each other in cheerful chaos. To her, it sounded like a language from another planet, full of noise, warmth, and confidence. The German women huddled by the windows, wrapped in gray blankets. They whispered what they thought it meant. A transfer? An inspection? Perhaps news of the war? But then they saw the red and green ribbons fluttering from the guards' caps, and disbelief set in. "Christmas," murmured Hilda, her breath visible in the cold. "They're really celebrating it." By mid-morning, the rumor became fact. The interpreter entered their barrack, his clipboard trembling slightly in his hands. "The commandant invites all women to the main hall at 1400 hours, he announced. "There will be a Christmas meal. Attendance voluntary." No one moved. Even the interpreter seemed unsure how to translate what came next. "The men have decided. They want to share food. And gifts. For German children." The room went still, as if the very air hesitated to carry the words any further. Then someone snorted. Ingrid, a sharp-eyed nurse from Cologne. "American propaganda," she muttered. "They'll take photographs to show how merciful they are." Lisa Lott didn't answer. She couldn't. Her heart had begun a strange, hesitant rhythm. Food and gifts? For their children? The thought twisted something deep inside her. A memory, warm and cruel at once. She saw her little brother Carl again, his hands outstretched for an orange she'd bartered months before the bombings. He peeled it slowly, reverently, saving the rind to smell later. "If it smells like this," he'd said, "then heaven must smell wonderful." She hadn't thought of that sense since. Now, as she watched the Americans stack wooden tables through the frost-blurred window, a part of her wanted to believe this feast might be real. Another part feared what it would do to her if it was. Outside, Private Morris was helping unload crates marked with stencils: apples, Washington State; oranges, Florida; milk powder; chocolate. He whistled as he worked. "Didn't think I'd spend Christmas feeding Nazis," he joked to his sergeant. "Don't think of 'em like that," the older man replied. "Think of 'em like someone else's kids who got caught in the wrong storm." The camp dogs barked as snow began to fall in earnest, a thin, reluctant dusting, but enough to whiten the ground. The women watched through the slats, silent, as if the snow itself were a miracle too fragile to interrupt. At noon, the mess hall doors opened. The prisoners filed out, 2 by 2, escorted by guards who seemed less like wardens and more like hosts. Inside, the hall had been transformed. Pine branches lined the walls, and above the tables hung strings of tin can lids punched with holes to shimmer like ornaments. A small American flag stood in one corner. Opposite it, a German Bible lay open to Luke 2. And on earth peace, goodwill toward men. The smell hit them first: roast turkey, real butter, cinnamon, coffee so strong it made their eyes sting. Some of the women gasped. Others pressed fists against their mouths. No one spoke. The chaplain, a mild man with hands too big for his uniform, stood by a record player. "Today," he said slowly, careful with the rhythm of his words, "we remember a birth that happened far from any country's border." The interpreter translated, his voice breaking on Geburt, birth. "No one is enemy to a child." The line landed like a stone in water, rippling through the room. For months they had eaten without flavor, spoken without tenderness. Now suddenly there was both. When the first plate was passed down the table, Lieselot hesitated. Steam rose from mashed potatoes glossed with butter. A slice of turkey, brown and glistening. Peas. And a small wedge of something golden she didn't recognize. "Pumpkin pie," murmured Private Morris from behind her. "Try it. Tastes like home." The fork trembled in her hand. She took one bite and felt heat bloom in her throat. Too rich, too sweet. For a moment, she wanted to spit it out. It tasted of everything she had lost. Across the room, an older prisoner whispered grace in German. The Americans bowed their heads anyway, not understanding the words but respecting their shape. A camera clicked once, but no one posed. Even the photographer seemed ashamed of breaking the silence. Afterward came the gifts. Each woman received a small paper parcel. Candy, wool socks, sometimes a doll or wooden toy. "For German children," the chaplain repeated. "You may write home and send them when the war ends." Lieselot untied the string from her package and found a small toy train carved from oak. The wheels turned. A child's toy, painted blue. Her breath caught. She could almost hear Carl's laughter. Ingrid looked at her own parcel, a red scarf, and frowned. "They think this makes up for everything?" she said. Her voice was sharp, but her eyes glistened. "It doesn't," Lieselot said quietly. "But maybe it keeps us from becoming what they think we are." Outside, the choir began again. Silent Night, sung now in both English and German. The two languages braided together, imperfect but strangely beautiful. Voices cracked on high notes, laughter mixing with tears. Private Morris leaned against the doorframe, listening. "You ever think," he murmured to his sergeant, "that maybe the good Lord's got a funny sense of humor? Feeding the people who tried to kill us." The sergeant shrugged. "Maybe that's the point." As the carol ended, the women sat in silence. No speeches, no forced smiles. Just the sound of the record crackling, and the faint hiss of snow against the tin roof. When the guards finally signaled for them to leave, Lieselot lingered by the table. She touched the edge of her plate, still warm. "Danke," she said softly to no one in particular. Private Morris heard her. "You're welcome," he said in halting German. "Merry Christmas." The words startled her. She turned, met his eyes for the first time. He didn't look away. For a moment, there was no uniform, no barbed wire, just two people standing on opposite sides of a miracle. Then the whistle blew. The women filed back into the cold, parcels clutched like relics. Behind them, the lights in the mess hall flickered and went out, one by one, leaving only the glow of snow beneath the guard towers. Lieselot walked in silence, the toy train pressed against her chest. She didn't know why her hands were shaking, whether from cold, gratitude, or the unbearable weight of mercy. But as the barrack door shut behind her, she whispered, half in wonder, half in fear. If this is how the enemy celebrates peace, what will we do when peace finally comes? The next morning dawned pale and heavy with silence. The storm had passed, leaving the camp blanketed in a thin crust of frost that glittered like glass. Smoke curled from the mess hall chimney, and the faint scent of coffee drifted through the compound. But something had changed. The women moved slower, speaking less. They carried their parcels like sacred things, wrapped again and again in rags or tucked inside their coats. No one laughed. No one dared to. What had begun as a strange, generous feast had unsettled something they couldn't name. Lieselot sat on her bunk with the wooden train in her lap, tracing the tiny blue paint along its edges. The wheels still turned. She imagined Carl pushing it across the kitchen floor, making the soft chuff sound with his lips. Then she imagined what Hamburg must look like now. Flattened streets, hollow windows, a city where even toys had turned to ash. She could not decide whether this gift was a comfort or a cruelty. Across the room, Hilda watched her in silence. "You haven't eaten since last night," she said. "I'm not hungry." "You should be. You cried more than anyone." Lieselot gave a small, brittle laugh. "I didn't cry because I was happy." "Then why?" "Because it was too kind." Hilda frowned, folding her blanket with deliberate precision. "Kindness doesn't erase what they did." "No," Lieselot whispered. "But it makes me wonder if we ever knew them at all." Outside, the guards were shoveling snow from the main path. Their breath came out in plumes of white, their voices echoing off the barrack walls. Private Morris was among them, his sleeves rolled up despite the cold. He worked without hurry, his face pink from the wind. When the women were let out for morning roll call, he caught Lieselot's glance by accident. She looked away immediately, clutching her coat tighter. The commandant arrived soon after, clipboard tucked under his arm. "You will assist with cleanup today," the interpreter announced. "Kitchen, tables, decorations. No guard escort necessary. You have earned trust." That word, trust, sent a murmur through the ranks. Trust was rarer than food in a prison. The women exchanged cautious looks before following the guards to the mess hall. The space looked almost unrecognizable. Yesterday's warmth had faded to cold ash. The pine branches drooped, brittle from the fire's heat. On the tables, empty cups and crumbs bore silent witness to the miracle that had happened there. Lieselot began to sweep the floor, the broom rasping softly against the planks. Every scrape stirred memories. The sound of carols, the flicker of candlelight on American faces, the strange stillness that had followed. Private Morris entered quietly, holding a stack of empty milk tins. "These need rinsing," he said, gesturing toward the wash basin. His German was clumsy but patient. Hilda stiffened. "We are not servants." He smiled faintly. "Not servants. Helpers. Makes the work faster." Something about his calmness disarmed her. She nodded reluctantly and took the tins. Lieselot watched the exchange, studying the space between them. How easily the wall of hostility had thinned. As the women worked, the chaplain appeared in the doorway. He held a letter in one hand, his expression somber. "Mail has come through the Red Cross," the interpreter translated. "Some of you may have news from home." A ripple of anticipation spread. The chaplain began reading names, handing out envelopes creased with foreign dust. When he reached Lieselot's, her knees nearly gave way. The handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's, neat and careful even in chaos. She stepped outside before opening it. The air stung her cheeks. The snow had begun to melt, running in thin rivulets along the fence line. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Lisa Lot, my brave girl, it began. We are alive. The house is gone, but Carl is safe. He still talks about the train. I tell him you will bring it back one day. God keep you until then. Her breath caught. She pressed the letter to her lips, tears spilling freely this time. The toy train in her pocket felt heavier now, not a reminder of pity, but of promise. She closed her eyes and let the cold wind burn her face clean. When she re-entered the hall, she found Morris waiting by the door. Bad news? He asked quietly. No, she said, voice thick. Good. Too good. He nodded as if he understood, though she doubted he truly could. Yet in that moment, words felt unnecessary. The silence between them said enough, that grief and grace could exist in the same breath. By afternoon, the women had finished cleaning. The chaplain thanked them and, before leaving, set down a small box on the nearest table. For those who wish to pray, he said simply. Inside was a single candle and a cross carved from dark wood. Later, when the guards dismissed them, Lisa Lot lingered again. She reached for the candle, struck a match, and watched the flame waver. Its light caught the grain of the table, still stained with coffee rings and crumbs. She didn't bow her head, but she whispered something anyway, half a prayer, half a confession. Hilda appeared behind her. You're still here. I was thinking, Lisa Lot said softly. How strange that mercy can hurt more than hate. Hilda frowned. You sound like them now. Maybe they sound like us. Before Hilda could answer, a sharp whistle split the air outside. A commotion rippled through the camp, shouting, hurried footsteps, the bark of orders. The women froze. Through the window, they saw trucks rolling in, engines growling. The interpreter burst in moments later, his face pale. New arrivals, he said. From the east. Civilians. Women and children. A cold weight settled in Lisa Lot's stomach. From where? He hesitated. Some from France, some from Germany. Refugees. The war, it's moving faster now. The women crowded near the window. The trucks stopped near the outer gate, and the tailgates dropped open. Out stepped figures bundled in rags, their faces gray with exhaustion. Among them were children, thin, hollow-eyed, clutching each other's hands. American medics moved quickly, guiding them toward the infirmary. One of the prisoners whispered, "They look like ghosts." Lisa Lot couldn't speak. She felt the letter in her coat pocket, the weight of the train in her palm. Her brother's name pulsed in her mind. Those children could have been him. Morris reappeared, shouting to the interpreter. "We need blankets from the women's barracks. Now." Without hesitation, Lisa Lot moved. She didn't wait for permission. She ran back toward the barracks, her breath clouding the air, her boots slipping on the half-melted snow. The others followed, wordless. They tore blankets from bunks, arms loaded, returning to the gate where the refugees stood shivering. The guards didn't stop them. No one did. For the first time since capture, the Germans crossed the invisible line without orders. They wrapped children in wool, pressed biscuits into small hands, murmured words that needed no translation. One little girl looked up at Lisa Lot and whispered, "Danke." The sound shattered something inside her, the final wall between guilt and grace. Hours later, when quiet returned to the camp, the women sat by the fence, their own blankets gone, shivering but strangely light. Hilda turned to her, eyes wide. "You think they'll punish us?" Lisa Lot looked at the horizon, where the last light of day bled into gray. "Maybe," she said. "But I think tonight, we became something different." And as darkness settled over the camp, the faint hum of a generator flickered again, casting light through the wire. In its glow, the women's faces no longer looked like prisoners, only human. Somewhere beyond the fence, a church bell rang from a distant town. The sound carried on the wind, gentle and haunting. Lisa Lot listened, her hands still clutching the little wooden train. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure which side of the war her heart belonged to. The snow had melted into mud by the second morning after Christmas. The camp looked smaller now, tired, almost ashamed of its own fences. Smoke from the kitchens hung low, smelling faintly of onions and soap. The American flag over the commandant's office stirred once in the wind, then fell still, heavy with damp air. Somewhere beyond the pines, the war still raged, but here time seemed to pause, as if the world had forgotten this pocket of humanity. Lisa Lott worked in the infirmary that day. The new refugees, women and children from the east, had been brought inside, and the air was thick with coughs and the sour tang of disinfectant. She carried buckets of boiled water, her arms trembling, her breath fogging against her mask. A small boy, no older than 6, stared at her with eyes too old for his face. His lips were cracked white. When she bent to hand him a cup, he reached for her wrist instead, as if to make sure she was real. The American nurse beside her, Corporal Jane Miller, offered a soft smile. "They think everyone in uniform hurts them," she whispered. Her accent stretched the words, making them almost kind. "Takes a while to unlearn fear." Lisa Lott nodded. The boy's fingers were still clutching her sleeve. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you still fear us?" Jane paused, then shook her head. "No. Not anymore." Their eyes met for a long moment across the steam of the buckets. The war had built walls between them, but here in the whitewashed room, the air smelled of medicine and milk soap, of something like truce. Outside, Private Morris arrived with another truckload of supplies. He unloaded crates of canned milk, blankets, and bread, his boots sinking into the slush. When he stepped into the infirmary, his face was red from the cold. "Command wants a head count," he told Jane, wiping his hands on his jacket. "And," he hesitated, noticing Lisa Lott, "there's talk the Army's closing some camps soon. Transfers." Jane frowned. "Where to?" "Midwest. Some north, some east. Depends who's left standing when this all ends." The words hung in the air, sharp and uncertain. Lisa Lott felt her stomach tighten. Transfer meant movement, away from this fragile peace, away from the people who had begun to see her not as an enemy, but as a woman. That night, she sat by the window of her barack, watching headlights crawl across the horizon. Trucks again, American convoys rolling west. The sky pulsed with the glow of distant fires. The war, it seemed, was still hungry. Hilda sat across from her, sewing a rip in her coat. "You heard?" Lisa Lott said softly. "About transfers?" "Yes. Maybe they'll send us home." "Home?" Lisa Lott repeated, the word brittle in her mouth. "If there's anything left to go back to." Hilda didn't answer. She tied off her thread with her teeth, then looked up. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe going home is just another kind of mercy." Lisa Lott turned back to the window. She could still see the faint outlines of the infirmary lights, flickering behind the wire. For the first time since capture, she realized she didn't know what side of the fence she belonged on anymore. 2 days later, the commander gathered them all in the yard. The mud was frozen again, crunching under their boots. He spoke through the interpreter. "The war is nearing its end. Many of you will be transferred to repatriation camps in the coming months. But before you go, there is one last duty." He gestured toward the infirmary. "The refugees need escort to the train depot tomorrow morning. Some of you will help." Lisa Lott raised her hand before thinking. The commander nodded once, approvingly. "Good," he said. "Compassion is better discipline than orders." That night, she barely slept. She lay awake listening to the creak of wood and the slow breathing of the others. She kept the letter from her mother under her pillow, the toy train beside it. The image of Carl, alive somewhere under the same sky, kept her heart from hardening. Dawn came gray and soundless. The refugees were lined up by the trucks, each wrapped in blankets that still smelled faintly of the camp soap. Snow drifted down again, thin and slow, like ash. Lisa Lott walked alongside the first truck, her hands guiding the smallest children aboard. Jane was there too, her hair tucked beneath her cap, her face pale from exhaustion. Morris approached, a clipboard in one hand. "Command says the bridge north might be iced over. We'll take the long road," he said. His eyes met Lisa Lott's briefly, then flicked away. "You'll be all right in the back. Just stay seated." The convoy moved through pine forest, tires crunching over frozen mud. Inside the truck, Lieselot held the boy from the infirmary against her shoulder. He slept quickly, his breath warm against her neck. Around them, women hummed lullabies too soft to recognize. The rhythm of the wheels became almost hypnotic. Hours later, the convoy halted. An American jeep had skidded off the road ahead. Soldiers scrambled to dig it out while snow thickened, swallowing sound. Morris jumped down, shouting for help. Lieselot, instinctively, climbed out too. "You'll freeze," he called, but she ignored him. Together they heaved at the fender, their boots sliding, breaths clouding the air. When the jeep finally lurched free, she laughed. A short, startled sound she hadn't made in years. Morris looked at her, grinning. "Didn't know Germans could smile. Didn't know Americans could listen," she shot back, and they both laughed until the cold stole their voices. When they reached the depot, the refugees were let out one by one. The platform smelled of coal smoke and rain. Steam hissed from the waiting train, blurring the air between the living and the lost. Jane handed out ration packs. Lieselot knelt to adjust the boy's scarf, tying it snug. "You'll be safe now," she whispered. "You'll see home again." He blinked up at her, confused. "And you?" She hesitated. "I don't know." The whistle blew. The refugees boarded. The boy waved once before disappearing into the mist. The sound of the departing train echoed down the valley like a prayer stretched thin. As the last car vanished, Lieselot stood motionless, her hand still raised from the wave she hadn't finished. Morris approached quietly, a thin smile on his lips. "You did good," he said. "Better than most of us." She turned to him. "Was it mercy, or was it guilt?" "Maybe both," he said. "Does it matter?" She thought for a long moment. "It does now." He nodded, unsure what to say. The wind tugged at the edge of his coat, carrying with it the faint sound of distant bells. Lieselot looked toward the horizon, where gray sky met the pale earth. "When this war ends," she murmured, "I hope we remember this." Morris glanced at her, puzzled. "Remember what?" "That mercy came before peace." The words hung there, fragile and fierce. And as the snow began to fall again, slow, unhurried, almost gentle, it blurred the fence lines until the world looked, for one fleeting moment, free.